The rumble of tank treads across European soil became one of the most distinctive sounds of the Second World War. At the heart of Germany's military doctrine stood the Panzer Divisions, armored formations that revolutionized modern warfare and changed the face of combat forever. These mechanized units represented not just technological advancement, but an entirely new philosophy of war that would influence military thinking for generations to come. The story of the Panzer Divisions begins in the aftermath of the First World War, when Germany found itself defeated, humiliated, and bound by the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. Yet within this defeat lay the seeds of innovation. German military theorists, studying the stalemate of trench warfare, became convinced that the future of warfare lay in mobility, speed, and concentrated armored force. Officers like Heinz Guderian became passionate advocates for tank warfare, drawing inspiration from British and French theorists while developing their own distinct vision of mechanized combat. Guderian and his contemporaries envisioned something far more ambitious than simply adding tanks to existing infantry formations. They imagined entire divisions built around armored vehicles, supported by motorized infantry, self-propelled artillery, and close air support. This concept, which would become known as Blitzkrieg or lightning war, emphasized rapid breakthrough operations, deep penetration into enemy territory, and the encirclement of opposing forces before they could establish defensive positions. The tank would not merely support the infantry, it would lead the charge, with all other elements coordinated to exploit the breakthrough. When the Wehrmacht began its rearmament in the mid-1930s, the Panzer Divisions took shape. The first 3 Panzer Divisions were formed in 1935, each containing hundreds of tanks organized into regiments, along with motorized infantry, reconnaissance units, engineers, and artillery. These weren't just collections of vehicles. They were combined arms formations designed to operate independently, capable of fighting, moving, and sustaining themselves deep behind enemy lines. To understand why the Panzer Division was so effective, you have to look inside the unit itself, its structure, its numbers, and how all those moving parts fit together into a single, fast-striking machine. A mature mid-war Panzer Division was far more than just tanks. On paper, a German Panzer Division usually fielded somewhere between 14,000 and 17,000 men, though the exact number varied by year and by specific division. Early in the war, many Panzer Divisions had around 250-300 tanks. As the war went on, that number often dropped to roughly 150 to 200 operational tanks, sometimes even fewer, as losses rose and production struggled to keep up. But those tanks were just the sharp tip of a much larger spear. At the heart of the division stood its Panzer Regiment, normally composed of 2 battalions. Each battalion was divided into companies, usually with 3 or 4 companies of medium tanks like the Panzer III or IV early in the war, and later Panthers, plus occasionally a company of heavier tanks like Tigers if attached. A typical company might field 10 to 17 tanks, so a full-strength Panzer regiment could theoretically put between 80 and 150 tanks into battle. In practice, mechanical breakdowns, combat losses, and fuel shortages meant that the actual number of available tanks was often significantly lower. Supporting the Panzer regiment were the Panzer Grenadiers, the mechanized infantry. A Panzer division usually had 2 Panzer Grenadier regiments, each made up of several battalions. These infantry units rode in trucks or, in more elite formations, in armored half-tracks, such as the SD Kampfserden 251. They were the ones who seized and held ground, cleared enemy strongpoints, protected the flanks of the tanks, and followed through once the armored breakthrough had been made. In many divisions, especially later in the war, the Panzer Grenadiers made up the bulk of the division's manpower. To keep this armored spearhead functioning, the division included a full artillery regiment, with towed or self-propelled guns that could lay down barrages ahead of an attack or defend against enemy counterattacks. There were anti-tank battalions equipped with towed guns, like the famous 75mm PaK-40, and later self-propelled tank destroyers. Reconnaissance battalions, equipped with armored cars, light tanks, and motorcycles, ranged ahead of the main body to scout enemy positions and exploit gaps. Engineer battalions cleared mines, built bridges, and handled demolitions. Signals units maintained radio and telephone links so that the division could coordinate fast-moving operations. Anti-aircraft battalions with 20mm, 37mm, and sometimes the famous 88mm guns guarded the division from enemy aircraft. Finally, a large tail of logistics and maintenance units supplied fuel, ammunition, food, and repairs, all vital for a formation that depended on constant movement. The early Panzer tanks, the Mark I, Mark II, were relatively light vehicles, intended primarily for training and reconnaissance. They were lightly armored and armed, hardly the fearsome machines that would later dominate battlefields, but they served their purpose in developing tactics and training crews. By the time war erupted in 1939, the Panzer III and Panzer IV were entering service, more capable machines that would form the backbone of German armored forces through the early war years. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 provided the first real test of Panzer doctrine. 6 Panzer Divisions participated in the campaign, and while the Polish army fought bravely, they were simply unprepared for the speed and coordination of German mechanized warfare. Panzer spearheads punched through defensive lines, raced deep into Polish territory, and linked up with forces advancing from different directions, creating vast encirclements. The campaign lasted just over a month, and the world took notice. But Poland was merely a rehearsal. In May 1940, 10 Panzer Divisions spearheaded the invasion of France and the Low Countries. What followed shocked the world. The French army was considered among the finest in Europe, with more tanks than Germany and the formidable Maginot Line fortifications. Yet within 6 weeks, France had fallen. The Panzer Divisions, concentrated in a thrust through the Ardennes forest, broke through at Sedan and raced to the English Channel, cutting off the best Allied armies in Belgium. The speed of the advance left even German high command nervous, but Guderian and his fellow panzer commanders pressed forward relentlessly. The success in France elevated the Panzer Divisions to legendary status. Within this organizational framework, certain divisions earned particular fame. One of the early and important Wehrmacht units was the 1st Panzer Division. Formed in 1935, it was among the original Panzer Divisions. It fought in Poland in 1939, spearheading the invasion and demonstrating the effectiveness of concentrated armored thrusts. In 1940, it was part of the drive through Belgium and France, taking part in the breakthrough and rapid advance to the Channel. Later, in Operation Barbarossa, it drove deep into the Soviet Union as part of Army Group North, advancing toward Leningrad. Its long service across multiple theaters made it a classic example of a pre-war professional panzer division that adapted as the conflict expanded and intensified. Perhaps the most legendary Wehrmacht panzer unit was the 7th Panzer Division, commanded in France by Erwin Rommel. During the 1940 campaign, this division moved so rapidly and penetrated so deeply into French lines that even German headquarters often lost track of it. French and British reports spoke of German tanks appearing out of nowhere, striking and then vanishing. This earned the 7th Panzer Division the nickname Gespenster Division, the Ghost Division. It captured vast numbers of prisoners, overran supply depots, and helped break the cohesion of the French defense. Later, the 7th Panzer would fight on the Eastern Front, taking part in Barbarossa and subsequent campaigns, but it was those weeks in France that cemented its place in military history. Another significant Wehrmacht formation was the 4th Panzer Division, which fought in Poland, France, and then in some of the most critical battles on the Eastern Front. It took part in the drive on Moscow in 1941 and, later, in the grinding defensive battles as the Red Army pushed westward. Like many early panzer divisions, it evolved from a tank-heavy offensive force into a mixed armored and infantry formation, increasingly used for mobile defense and firefighting along collapsing fronts. By 1941, as Germany prepared to invade the Soviet Union, the panzer force had expanded dramatically. Operation Barbarossa would see over 20 panzer divisions committed to the largest invasion in history. The early months seemed to repeat the pattern of previous campaigns. Massive encirclements at Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, and Vyazma trapped hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. Panzer spearheads advanced hundreds of miles, reaching the outskirts of Moscow by December. But the Soviet Union proved to be a different kind of enemy. The vast distances, poor roads, and harsh weather took a terrible toll on German vehicles. Soviet resistance while initially disorganized, grew fiercer. And the Red Army possessed its own excellent tanks, the T-34 and KV-1, which shocked German crews with their combination of armor, firepower, and mobility. The Panzer Divisions, designed for rapid campaigns of maneuver, found themselves locked in a grinding war of attrition. As the war progressed, the Panzer Divisions evolved. New tanks entered service, most notably the Panther and Tiger, powerful machines with thick armor and devastating guns. These tanks could destroy enemy armor at ranges previously unimaginable, and their frontal armor was nearly impervious to most Allied weapons. Yet they were also complex, expensive, and prone to mechanical problems. Germany could never produce them in the numbers needed to match Allied and Soviet production. Parallel to the Wehrmacht's Panzer Divisions, another force was developing its own armored formations. The Waffen SS, the military branch of Heinrich Himmler's SS organization, began the war with small motorized units but gradually expanded into full divisions and eventually corps. The Waffen SS Panzer Divisions would become some of the most controversial and, from a purely military perspective, most formidable units of the German armed forces. The Waffen SS Panzer Divisions followed the same broad structure as their Wehrmacht counterparts, but often with some notable differences. They usually received priority for new equipment and reinforcements, and tended to have particularly strong Panzer Grenadier components. Many Waffen SS Panzer Divisions had a high proportion of their infantry in half-tracks, giving them greater mobility and protection. They frequently had attached heavy tank battalions equipped with Tigers, or their own integral heavy companies, which gave them unusual striking power in defensive and counter-attack roles. On paper, some Waffen SS Panzer Divisions in 1943–44 were among the strongest armored formations in the German military, at least temporarily, before attrition ground them down. The first Waffen SS Panzer Divisions emerged from motorized infantry formations that had proven themselves in combat. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions were upgraded to Panzer Divisions, receiving their own tank regiments. These units often received priority for the newest equipment and attracted volunteers who were, at least initially, highly motivated and physically fit. They developed reputations as elite shock troops, committed to the most difficult sectors of the front. Additional Waffen SS Panzer Divisions followed. The Wiking Division drew volunteers from Scandinavia and other Germanic countries. The Hohenstaufen and Frundsberg divisions were formed as the war expanded. By 1944, the Hitler Jugend Division, composed largely of teenagers from the Hitler Youth Organization, entered combat in Normandy, fighting with a fanaticism that shocked Allied forces. The military effectiveness of Waffen SS Panzer Divisions is undeniable from a historical perspective. Units like the Leibstandarte and Das Reich participated in virtually every major campaign, from the Balkans to the Eastern Front to Normandy. They were frequently called upon to counterattack Allied breakthroughs or to hold critical sectors. In battles like Kharkov in 1943, Waffen SS Panzer Corps achieved significant tactical victories, recapturing the city and stabilizing the front after the disaster at Stalingrad. On the Waffen SS side, the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, began as Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, but expanded over time into a full panzer division. It fought in the Balkans, on the Eastern Front, in Italy, in Normandy, and in the Ardennes. Militarily, it became known for aggressive, often effective counterattacks, such as those during the Third Battle of Kharkov in early 1943, where Waffen SS Panzer Divisions, including Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, helped recapture the city and inflicted heavy losses on the Red Army. However, these battlefield achievements sit alongside a brutal record of war crimes. Elements of the Leibstandarte murdered British prisoners in France in 1940, and later, during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, Kampfgruppe Piper from the division committed the Malmedy massacre, executing American POWs and murdering civilians. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich is another prominent example. After service in the early campaigns, it fought extensively on the Eastern Front and later played a key role in the Kharkov counteroffensive, where its armored and mechanized units conducted hard-hitting attacks to stabilize a collapsing front. When transferred to France in 1944, Das Reich was ordered north to oppose the Allied landings in Normandy. On its march, the division's units committed several atrocities, the most infamous being the massacre at Oradour-sur-Glane, where over 600 French civilians were murdered and the village destroyed. In Normandy itself, Das Reich fought stubborn defensive battles against British and American forces, inflicting and suffering heavy losses in the brutal bocage fighting. The 3rd SS Panzer Division, Totenkopf, had particularly grim origins. Its core came from concentration camp guard units of the SS Totenkopfverbände. Militarily, Totenkopf fought in France in 1940 and then on the Eastern Front, where it took part in heavy fighting around Demyansk and later at Kursk and Kharkov. It developed tactical skill as a hard-fighting armored formation, especially in defensive battles where its panzer grenadiers and tanks fought tenaciously. But it carried into the field the mentality and brutality of its origins. Totenkopf units were involved in war crimes against civilians and prisoners from the very beginning of the war in Poland, and continued this pattern throughout the conflict. The 5th SS Panzer Division. Wiking is notable because it included many non-German volunteers from Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and other occupied or sympathetic countries. It fought almost exclusively on the Eastern Front, from the initial stages of Barbarossa through the long retreat across Ukraine and Poland. Wiking developed a reputation for tactical effectiveness, particularly in local counterattacks and defensive battles, where its panzer and panzer grenadier elements worked together skillfully. Again, however, this professionalism was tied to a deeply ideological formation that took part in the brutal occupation and anti-partisan campaigns of the East. Later in the war, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend became infamous and tragic in equal measure. Formed largely from teenage volunteers of the Hitler Youth, this division entered combat in Normandy in June 1944. Despite their youth, the soldiers of Hitlerjugend fought with fanatical determination, often counter-attacking immediately and refusing to retreat even when outnumbered and outgunned. They inflicted serious casualties on Canadian and British forces during the early stages of the Normandy campaign. But their lack of experience, combined with Allied material and air superiority, led to heavy losses. The division also committed war crimes in Normandy, including the execution of Canadian prisoners, showing again how ideological indoctrination, military training, and criminal behavior intertwined in many Waffen SS formations. Yet this military effectiveness cannot be separated from the criminal nature of the organization they served. The Waffen SS was an integral part of the SS apparatus, an organization responsible for some of the worst atrocities in human history. Waffen SS units participated in war crimes and massacres across occupied Europe. The Totenkopf division had direct links to the concentration camp system. The Leibstandarte murdered prisoners of war. The Hitlerjugend executed Canadian prisoners in Normandy. These were not aberrations but patterns of behavior that reflected the ideological indoctrination these units received. By 1944, the Panzer Divisions, both Wehrmacht and Waffen SS, faced an impossible situation. In the East, the Red Army had grown into a massive mechanized force that outnumbered German armor by vast margins. Soviet tank production had reached industrial scales that Germany could never match. In the West, the Allied invasion of Normandy brought American and British armored divisions equipped with reliable, if individually inferior, tanks produced in overwhelming numbers. The Panzer divisions fought on with skill and determination, but they were fighting a losing battle against mathematics. For every Allied tank destroyed, the Allies could field 5 or 10 replacements. Fuel shortages crippled mobility. Experienced crews were killed and replaced with hastily trained novices. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Germany's last major armored offensive, briefly shocked the Allies, but ultimately failed due to lack of fuel and overwhelming Allied air superiority. In the final months of the war, Panzer divisions existed more in name than reality. Units that once fielded hundreds of tanks might have a dozen operational vehicles. Crews fought on with courage born of desperation, but the outcome was inevitable. By May 1945, the panzer force that had revolutionized warfare lay in ruins across Europe. The legacy of the panzer divisions remains complex. From a purely military perspective, they represented a revolution in warfare that influenced every modern army. The concept of combined arms, mechanized warfare, pioneered by the Panzer Divisions, became the foundation of modern armored doctrine. Tank forces around the world studied German tactics, organization, and operational concepts. Yet this military legacy cannot be divorced from the regime these forces served. The Panzer Divisions were instruments of Nazi aggression, participating in wars of conquest that brought death and destruction across Europe. The Waffen SS Panzer Divisions, despite their tactical effectiveness, were part of an organization fundamentally dedicated to criminal ideology and actions. The story of the Panzer Divisions is ultimately a reminder that military effectiveness and technological innovation do not exist in a moral vacuum. These formidable fighting forces served one of history's most evil regimes, and their victories enabled crimes of unprecedented scale. Understanding their history requires acknowledging both their military significance and the terrible purposes to which they were devoted. The thunder of their tank treads marked not just a revolution in warfare, but also one of humanity's darkest chapters.